The Short Game. This is a show about short video games, games that respect your time. I'm Reagan Kelly, and Hecky Almo.
Hecky Almo. I'm Nate Heininger.
What the hecky? We all mow here.
Oh my God. Don't do this to me, Shane. That's right. This week we are talking about 1000 times resist. I've been saying the name for this game wrong in my head in multiple different ways
and on the podcast.
Yeah, and on the podcast. I was saying 1000xRESIST because I was just inserting an extra O or zero in there. And also I was saying xRESIST, where apparently, according to the developers, it is times resist. And anyway, long story short, that's the game that we are talking about today. And I've been looking forward to talking about this on the podcast for a while.
We usually calls by name, don't we?
Yes. Didn't we? Nate did.
Yeah, I did and Reagan did. You're the only one who didn't.
Oh, Oh, hecky.
God. Shane's here too. Hair to hair, brother.
Red to blue.
All right. I'm more of a circle to square, or square to sphere guy myself.
Sphere to square.
Yeah. All right.
So let's talk about 1000 times resist. I guess you'd call this like a narrative adventure game from Sunset Visitor, which is a team from Vancouver, Canada, relevant for the story. It's this is a more Canadian than most games, and from a really, really interesting team. So we'll talk about the game in a second, but I think it's worth just briefly talking about like the team that made it. This is it's headed by creative director Remy Siu, who comes from a background of doing theater and other types of performance art and visual art and like new media and dance, and collaborated with a number of his collaborators on those mediums and sort of brought them in to make this game. And so I get the impression that like he's not entirely new to like game development or anything, but like this is a big departure for him and for most of his team. And so what they've created here is a narrative game that feels very much like something that's got a bit of a breath of fresh air of like how to tell a story in a game, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. You definitely see the influence of like, this is a team that is used to creating art in a way that you don't typically see game development studios create it. And I was blown away with the story here and how well it was told, the cinematography of it, the whole package is really incredible.
They have a huge amount of creativity in how they made this, and in a way that like goes back and forth with the story that they're actually telling. Like that, I think it's pretty clear. Like, you know, if you focus on just having one character model, you can make that character model amazing, and within that limitation, you're able to tell a story that would never be told otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah. One character model, a really small number of like sets, so to speak. That's part of how I feel like it has like a theater feel to it, is like they're doing a lot with the small number of like physical spaces that they've designed. That's, not something where they need to create new assets for a new level for every beat of the story. This takes place in a constrained space, unity of place and time. Kind of thing.
Which makes you, I think, also grow a certain fondness for it. The more time you spend in these locations with these characters, you start to build a connection with them. We've done a lot of these sort of narrative games over the years, and spoilers, I think this is my favorite one by like a mile. I absolutely loved this game, and I'm really, really excited to talk to you guys about it. Probably should say though, this is not necessarily a short game. Your mileage may vary. It absolutely respects your time, and I'm super excited for us to talk about it. And I'm very, very grateful for the chance to have played it. But it also took us. We've been talking about covering this game on this show for several weeks now, because at least for me, it took me quite a while to like get through this. And so I think just to honor the premise of the show,
it's also not a long game.
No,
it's not.
No.
We have made exceptions to the very foundational premise of the podcast that we do before, and usually they are for games that are like sometimes like 80 hours. I think we talked about Tears of the Kingdom at
Well,
one
sure.
point.
I think
we got a lot of flack from the fans for that because we were. But this game, at the most, I think it probably would take you about like 13, 15 hours.
Oh, yeah, maybe, or more like 16 to 18 for me, but that's fine.
Mm-hmm. Did you really need to talk to absolutely everybody? Because I don't think you do.
I certainly did, but also, there maybe I got lost in the orchard like 800 times, things like that. You know, but no.
This is a game with many thousands of fully voice acted lines of dialogue, and that's like the star of the show for me. I mean, it's a enormous undertaking of both writing and, I thought, very high quality narration. So
yeah, I want to talk about that for a second. So before we get into talking about story, and obviously like this is going to be a spoiler break episode, probably a relatively early spoiler break, because so much of what I want to talk with you guys about is the story and the characters, and there's so much going on there. But like the one of the things that just immediately like jumps out about this game is the way that it sounds. Obviously, like the sound design is good, but like the way that these things are performed, these folks did not go to, voice actor professionals when they created this. They went to their theater friends basically to do the voices here. And that's not to say that voice actors, are doing anything wrong. That's a great, it's an important profession. Voice actors are great, talented people, but often they are directed to give these performances that are a little bit like they're big performances. And this is a small, intimate space full of people. I would almost call this like mumblecore. Like this is like people doing the most understated, really nuanced, emotional voice acting performances that I think I've ever seen in a game. And the writing is phenomenal, but like they're also just so much of this is carried on actors giving incredible performances, just fantastic performances.
Yeah. A lot of games that are fully voice acted, about halfway through, if not far earlier, I find myself reading and skipping, and skipping. Yeah. And I won't say that I listen to the voice acting 100% of the time in this game. But of any game we've played with full voice acting, I engaged in and enjoyed like just letting it play out and listening to the full voice acting far more than I ever have before because of the performances. And just, I think the writing is absolutely incredible. And hearing how these actors performed the writing, was pretty stunning.
One of the things that I found out about the development of this game that made a lot of sense afterwards, and also is just so shockingly unusual for game development in general, is that this game this plays out across 10 episodes or chapters or what have you. They made each one at a time and finished making each chapter before starting writing the next one. Is that insane?
It's pretty odd. I mean, how do you plan a big story like this?
Well, they had obviously like broad stroke story stuff, but like imagine like getting to the end of chapter 1 of this and not knowing what was happening in chapter 2 yet exactly. Like wild.
That is absolutely insane for game development. I do think that's how a lot of TV shows have done it. Even prestige TV, Breaking Bad was pretty well known for that they were writing the show, producing it as it was airing, and they would they had a broader idea of where things were going, but they also were figuring it out along the way. Like there's the show's like 15 years old at this point, so minor spoiler for the final season of Breaking Bad, but like one of the writers in the first episode of the last season had the idea to put this giant gun in the episode, and they're like, we'll figure out a cool way to use that thing at some point, right? and then they actually like talked about how it became like a big stress point for them as they were writing the show down the line of the season of like, well, shit, what do we do with that giant gun? I mean, it's literally a Chekhov's gun situation, and they ended up doing something really cool with it.
That is exactly, I think, what works here is like they get to the end of every chapter, and not in a corny way. Like every chapter ends with like, I cannot believe that just happened, and I cannot wait to see what happens next. It's these and not in those like corny cliffhanger way, but like in a really sincere. This game never stops surprising you with where it is willing to go and what it is willing to make happen. You know, things that just like destabilize the game. Like one of the things that one of the developers said in one of the interviews I was listening to was that, you know, at every point at the end of a chapter, they were trying to choose what would make them the most uncomfortable for beginning writing the next chapter. Like, and I think about like the end of chapter 1, which again, we're not going to get into spoilers, but this is a game that's been out for a little while. And like chapter 1, I think is probably fair game. Yeah. And towards the end of chapter 1, like they said they didn't know that they were going to have Watcher turn in Fixer until they got to the end of that chapter and realized like, well, what would surprise us the most? What would make us the most uncomfortable going into chapter 2? And that choice, like, makes that whole the whole game turns on that, and you only get that with this approach. It's just such an insane approach to take to making a game, but it so worked here. It's amazing. And I think calling back to a TV show is exactly the right thing. This felt like that in terms of pacing.
Yeah, absolutely. I normally don't like calling for this sort of stuff because I'm like, the game is the game and you can just enjoy the game. But I'm like, I kind of do want to see this world turned into a TV show, mostly so I can just experience it again, but slightly different. But it really just, it felt that way from the visual styling, the change of pace, the change of visuals. Like there's some stunning, I've used that word a lot now, but I guess that's how I feel about this game. Visual changes that happen throughout the game as you learn more about what's going on and whatnot, that I just was so consistently floored.
Yeah, there's a lot of experimentation with how you interact with it, because like fundamentally this is kind of a walking simulator, or maybe more charitably an adventure game. But it starts off with that perspective, and then is constantly giving you moments where it tries something different from a top-down view. So it starts off mainly with like a third-person perspective, and I would say visually, and in terms of the perspective you're taking, really reminded me of like Nier Automata, and in many ways reminded me of that. But it'll suddenly go to a 2D side scroller appearance. It'll suddenly switch to a top-down view or a first-person view, or a weird interactive thing where you're jumping between nodes on a map. And so that aspect of it always kept it feeling very engaging and kept you moving forward, and was a great way for them to highlight parts of the story that maybe they wanted you to feel a little bit different about what you were engaging with, instead of just walking around and exploring the same space. So really, really cool.
I think we can't get much further without at least setting up the story, which is, going to be the spoiler-free version of this. So I want to explain it a little bit. So this is a game about a far future. It's a sort of a strange post-apocalypse. I can't imagine a more mid-COVID narrative.
Yeah, this was definitely made during COVID.
Yeah. And in fact, one of the reasons they said they made this as opposed to producing theater was that they were all isolating in their homes. Canada maybe much more so than, I'm in Texas. People were out huffing each other's germs all over the place around here, mask free. But
this did make me think a little bit, small tangent. I remember peak lockdown. There was a narrative going around. It was well, I guess one thing that might be good out of this whole thing is we're going to get some really good art out of this. All these artists, all these people out here locked in their homes, nowhere else to go. We're going to get some great art out of this. And I don't really feel like that came to be. I feel like most people just, developed trauma rather than using that time to focus on art. But
some of that art had to come later.
But this game, there's a few. Don't get me wrong. There's definitely some examples of that. Bo Burnham's Inside is one of my favorite things of all time, and that was peak COVID lockdown are, and there's certainly other examples out there, but I didn't feel like the proposed promise of at least we'll get good art out of the lockdown really came to be until I played this game. I'm like, this feels like a truly, like, not to make it worth it or anything, but like, do we get this game if people hadn't gone through the experience of the lockdown and the pandemic and all of its fallout? I don't know, maybe, but
I think it would have been a different story, a different game. And that even that said, though, like, it's not necessarily about COVID lockdown. Like, this is a very different story than that. It has echoes of that, but it has other things to say other than about COVID and the lockdown.
There are a lot of there are themes here that are all over the map. There's of course there's COVID, but also another kind of the time theme of the Hong Kong protests that started in like 2019. We're still kind of rolling through at that time.
Yeah, it would be really minimize the scope and the impact of the story to say this is a lockdown story or a COVID story, but it absolutely has been inspired partly by that.
It's there. It's
and I mean, I'm back on the idea of like restrictions breed creativity. I mean, lockdown itself being a restriction, but the fact that they put all or nearly all of the protagonists of this in a variety of different masks, all throughout, kind of gave a really interesting way to make each character very visually different because they just made a bunch of different masks.
Yeah. So the story, such as we're able to understand it at the beginning, the very first shot of this game, a person in a futuristic blue outfit with a just absolutely furious expression on her face comes into a strange empty room where another woman wearing a black outfit that I could only describe as like religious goth or something, like wild outfit, is saying strange prayers to herself and tells this blue clad person to go away. This is Mother's time. And the furious blue woman stabs this black clad woman through the chest with a glowing knife. And then we cut back in time, this incredible intro where you're like, what is that? Where are we going? The first thing that I thought in this story is like, oh, we just saw the end of the story. One of the biggest surprises of the game was like, no, you didn't. But this is, we've seen this strange moment of murder, and we're flashing back and beginning the story of, we are set in the far future. We learn some of this stuff almost immediately. We are set in the far future of our real world in a place that called the Orchard, a sort of strange enclosed world with a quote unquote inside sky.
I like that it says the year is unknown.
Yes, the year is unknown. And we are playing as Watcher, a newly appointed Watcher. This is her name and also job title. This is her function. And she is one of many clones, sisters, who live together in the Orchard, all identical. And because she's just begun her job as Watcher, she's told by her elder sister, Principal, that she needs to complete a number of communions. These are I don't know what you'd call these sort of like
memory sharing.
Yeah, where she has to see the memories and interact with the memories of their mutual mother from whom they are all cloned, the ALLMOTHER. So this is a futuristic society, a futuristic isolated society of clones of a single woman and the ALLMOTHER. And all of them are assigned, it's a very high control, everyone is assigned their function society. And you as Watcher are getting the privilege and duty of, I guess, examining the memories of this forgotten world, our world, where the ALLMOTHER, a teenager from Vancouver named Iris, who has become potentially the last living thing on Earth, her and her clones, and examining that trying to understand the present of their strange society by sort of viewing the history of the All-Mother. That is the beginning of the story. Did I get anything wrong or miss anything there?
I think you've got it, but maybe without. It might also be worth it to introduce some of the other clones that are particularly relevant at this point in the story. And there's Fixer, whose job is presumably to fix things. There's Healer, there's Principal, the one who's in charge, and who am I missing? Knower. And then, of course, Bang Bang Fire.
It's such a good name.
BBF. Such a good name. Oh, my God.
There's this underlying childness to the whole thing that you explore, and you get little hints at it. Some of the very early shocking moments to me in this game are where that kind of comes front and center. And that name, Bang Bang Fire, which is the name for essentially the security, that their function is security. So,
I think
it's
security
also what I didn't even mention.
It's also worth mentioning, the principal is the same thing. Like the one who's in charge is the principal, not a leader.
I was going to say, like the thing that's super funny about this what doesn't I think come across in the marketing is that there's a lot of humor in this game, and a lot of it comes from the fact that this is this far future society that is entirely made up of whatever was carried forward by the last living person, a teenage girl. So the authority figure is Principal. There's these childish drawings that are held up as like high art.
Right. It's not jokes. Exactly. It's humor in the situation. Like there's something very, very early on where one of the sisters calls another one basic, and it's treated like the most oh my God, I absolutely love that. The lens of an entire society built through what do you think she is, like 17-year-old girl,
something like that. Yeah.
Not to Reagan, you were going to talk about the occupants, which is the other piece here. The end of the world came at the hands of maybe some of the most bizarre biology from space that I've seen before, where what you see is these massive headless, translucent, androgynous figures with where their heads would be is instead a insanely ornate halo made out of little geometric shapes. I don't know if there's a better way to explain it, but the occupants are very mysterious for much of the story, so I won't get too much into that right now. I guess we're still pre-spoiler, but it's a very crazy alien invasion. In fact, I would say really reminded me of like end of Evangelion levels of.
Well, and
Evangelion was like one of the things that really was a touch point here, and Nier as well, because like we've talked about, like this is super inspired by Nier. If you've ever been interested in playing Nier, like this has so much of that flavor without some. It's a more coherent story than Nier, which is definitely a compliment. Like Nier is wild, bizarre, and also a little incoherent in places. And here, this is a much more coherent story, but it has a lot of the same juice, if you know what I mean. That said, it also doesn't have any of the combat or action of those games. It's just laser focused on the story. And that also extends to the fact that like those are both stories about a deep future where the Earth is occupied by mysterious, unknowable aliens. And there is a generations long project to try to rid the Earth of those aliens, but it doesn't seem to be going anywhere. It's stalled out. And what's left of human society is this strange remnant that has morphed into something unrecognizable.
And Shane, you talking about the design of the occupants. I think it is absolutely wild design. And I don't know if it's just that character design alone or the combination of it and their like all the lead up where you're learning about this and the world and what has happened. But I know like the first time we saw them on screen, it was like I felt like it felt chilling. You know, it was they've created the mystery of this world and what's going on, why, how do these people find themselves in this situation is really what drives it forward. And starting it's sort of the classic, you know, you start at the end so people know what you're working to, but having the game open with ALLMOTHER being stabbed to death by the character that then you start playing, I'm immediately like, well, how did that happen? You know? And so you go through these very intimate experiences, learning more about ALLMOTHER and Watcher and all of that. But you know that this all results in ALLMOTHER being stabbed by the character you're playing. And it really does a good job of pushing you forward and that with the sort of not cliffhangers, but sort of the twists and turns of every chapter really made this thing like hard for me to put down. Like I have a hard time sitting and playing one game for an extended amount of time. And I was just like fully engrossed in this thing over and over and over.
I think it's mostly due to the incredible pacing here. Like the pace of this story is like, it never drops a beat. It is constantly surprising you. Every chapter is like, oh, I can't wait to see what's happening next. And there is more plot in this than in 2-3 seasons of a lot of TV shows. Like there's a lot of story here, and the characters are really interesting. So you like want to know what you want, those moments where you get them. Just like any good media, like you have these propulsive moments of plot and story where you're just like learning important new things or seeing dramatic action. And there's also, it has lots of opportunities for these smaller conversations, intimate conversations between characters that you want to see. I want to see, you know, Watcher interact with Knower because I want to know what their relationship is like. I want to know what one of them knows that the other one doesn't. What are they holding back from each other? What are they sharing? I want to see those relationships grow and develop over time.
All the other just we've talked about the function named clones,
the six sisters,
but there are a ton of clones, and they're all in basically like a schooling system to maybe one day graduate to be the new fixer or the new Watcher or whatever in case something were to happen to them. And they're just all around too, and they usually have something to say, conveniently, usually kind of about what's going on, which at first felt a little like cheesy that these people would be sitting around talking about the ALLMOTHER's like birth story at the same time that you're going through it. But then the more you spend time, you realize, well, what the hell else are they going to be talking about? Their entire world is built around the ALLMOTHER and like worshiping her story. So of course, that's all that anyone is talking about. But I loved just walking around and talking to everybody and just trying to figure out what was happening.
I pointedly did not love some of the walking around. If I have one big critique of this, it's that the hardest part of the game is right at the beginning as you are trying to figure out how to get around the orchard, which is just a beautiful and kind of interesting to explore area. But we talked to Nate, you kind of mentioned that there's like a childish there's some bunch of childish art that's here. You can pull up a map, but it's a hand-drawn map
not
that
helpful.
looks like it not super helpful. It's a hand-drawn map that looks like it was drawn by, I don't know, maybe a 14-year-old.
I played this on Steam Deck exclusively, and between the childlike nature of the map and also the smaller screen, I basically was unable to use the map in any sort of helpful capacity.
I mean, I had similar experiences in that, like, it is confusing and sometimes sort of frustrating to navigate the orchard, especially like, I mean, I can forgive it a little bit of this because at the very beginning you are the new fixer, or sorry, the new Watcher. And that means that you've just essentially basically come up from the old town, which we don't see until much later, and you're kind of new to this space in addition to being new to your role. And so part of like wandering around and finding it a little confusing, I can forgive that. And they did add a map that didn't apparently exist in the first version of the game, but I So if you played on a small screen, I played on like the world's biggest screen. I started playing this right when I was like most excited by having recently gotten my VR headset. And so I played almost the whole game streamed to a like movie theater size screen floating in a space void.
That's awesome.
And that was cool. I don't necessarily think that I recommend that as your approach for this. Occasionally wandering around, I would get a little seasick just walking around the orchard, but it was cool.
So Reagan, how was the IMAX experience other than the nausea that it induced?
I actually had to do a lot of fiddling to figure out like, well, okay, how big and immersive of a screen can I sit in front of before just wandering a character around in 3D space makes me want to hurl? And it turns out it's like the equivalent of about 100-inch screen ish, I think. But I don't know. That was cool. I found that to be a good experience.
I had probably had way more than you guys. This is my just standard experience with types of games like this, is where I just have no idea where to go and I just wander around forever. And that did happen to me a number of times, even though there is also a waypointing system, but that was also not perfect and not available at all times. So there were a few situations, like there's one later in the game where it moves into like third person right behind the character, and the whole map sort of blurs, and you have to walk them very slowly to a certain character that I couldn't remember where they were in this thing. And I probably spent like a half an hour just wandering around essentially in slow motion. And it was a major buzzkill for like that moment. It took me forever to figure out where to go. You guys are probably like, oh yeah,
I know exactly the scene you're talking about, and I had a little bit of trouble with that too, although I did find them relatively quickly just by vibes.
Ended up like, it's like a city street sort of thing, and I ended up basically like going to a corner and like, I'm going to work my way down this until I find it. And of course, they're on the full other side. So that's part of the reason I think this game took me longer than probably most people's. I had a number of these situations where I just end up like canvassing a space to find where I'm supposed to go, and so I had some of this, and it did impact my overall like play time, but ultimately it doesn't really sour my opinion on the game too much, because I just loved it so much. I think part of that is just me being bad at these types of games too.
Yeah. Any game where you have like exploring large virtual spaces to just progress the conversation always seems to have this problem. I don't think anyone's totally solved it. This game did thankfully have a thing where you could pull up like a sort of a compass on screen that would help you get from point A to point B. So yeah, I
did not have waypoints for everything though. I remember there were some in the first few chapters, there are some objectives that are like optional objectives about like things like talk to every sister, and it only highlights like the main sisters.
You don't have to talk to every sister.
Yeah. I know it was an optional objective, but like I was like, oh, surely I've done it by now. That really bugged me. So yeah, there's some frustrations there. I think if you're playing this and you find that you're getting frustrated with a situation like that, this is the kind of game where I'd be like, hey, Nate, you're stuck trying to find that person. Go look up that 10 seconds of this game on YouTube.
So
and figure it out.
Did start doing that kind of thing. I found a no commentary walkthrough that I enjoyed, and I basically just like paste it along. So if I got stuck somewhere where I didn't know what I was supposed to do, instead of just running my head against it, I did start to just like, I'm just going to watch this, because I'm like, I really love this. I do not want anything. So I was like watching it as like as slow as possible, just trying to find exactly where I am just to get the one answer that I need. And that's exactly what I did. And I would recommend the same.
Yeah. So let's see. What else can we talk about before we start getting into deep spoiler territory? It's getting kind of slim.
I guess there's, we've called it like an adventure game, a walking simulator. There are some gameplay type mechanics that kind of happen. That
no jumping.
Yeah, there's no jumping.
No, I mean the node jumping.
Node
there's
is
the
jumping.
The thing where you're hurling yourself from dot to dot. What were people's opinions on that?
I liked it. I thought it was fine.
It was just okay.
So when you're in the communions, and these are essentially like virtual spaces, you are remembering, you're living through the memories of the ALLMOTHER in this sort of fragmentary way. And it has kind of two main mechanics that it has in there. The node jumping thing Shane was talking about is that sometimes it will ask you to move through this sort of virtual space by sort of zipping between nodes. I thought that was fine. It's just a navigation thing. Sometimes it's a bit of a navigation puzzle. It's asking you to like figure out how to get up to the top of something by zipping between a certain number of nodes. The other thing was the time mechanic, which I actually think was the more important one here. Like you're told by your secretary, the floating robot presence that accompanies you into these things, that that they're going to give you certain time coordinates that you can flip between, and you get some of the expected stuff there. Like, I want to get into the gym or whatever, but the way is blocked. Let me go back to the previous time node when it wasn't blocked, go in and then zip forward to the next time node again. You can go backward and forward in time, which is it's a decent part of the game in terms of just like gameplay stuff, but like it really works in terms of narrative.
Mm-hmm.
If you're wanting to experience this fragmentary memories, having it be basically a collection of moments that you can jump between works, I think really, really well. But yeah, overall, like there's more, I don't know, game mechanics, I guess, in the communions than there are in much of the rest of the game. But that's not where I was focused.
I liked the time jumping one, especially as a storytelling mechanic. I made the mistake of when I started playing the game and you kind of get introduced to the time jump mechanic, and I put the game down and then came back like 3 days later and like, how the hell do I get into this gym? Like the same puzzle you were just talking about. Like, oh yeah, there must be a back door I'm not finding or something. And then finally remember, like, damn it.
I had that exact same experience, Nate. Like I just occasionally at random points throughout the game, even fairly late into the game, I would be like, what do I do next? And I'm like, oh, I forgot. I can press on the triggers on the controller to move forward and backward in time. I forgot.
I would miss that. We've now switched into the node jumping moment, and I'd be running around looking everywhere for where to go, and then realize, well, if I just slightly put my gaze upwards, I'll see the big thing that I'm supposed to zip to. But I did not do that until fully exploring the piece of land that I'm in. There was another one that was in slow motion like that I spent way too long in, not realizing I needed to just look up and do the zip button. But I liked them as mixing up, the pace and everything. The node jumping was my least favorite one. Sometimes at least for me, spent quite a while trying to figure out which way to go and all that. And it felt like it slowed it down more than it served the purpose of breaking it up. But ultimately, I liked the idea of being like, I think it's supposed to be representative of being like flung between memories. You're being pulled from one thing to another. And I thought that was cool, and just sort of like the uncontrollable nature that your little character seems to be going through as you're being like whipped around these nodes. I thought thematically.
And it makes good use of it for pace reasons. Sometimes it's this like calm practice of moving into a new memory, and you're like analyzing your scenario and you're doing it. And other times, like there's a timer or there's weird other like story pressures, and it's just like a scramble. And I thought it was great that they had like the ability to do both. It could have those like, even though this is a fairly simple mechanic, like occasionally, doing anything as simple as like push a button to zoop over to a node can become like a really tense part of a key moment of the game.
Yeah, especially as you learn more and more what's actually happening.
Well, we're already 42 minutes into this recording, and we need to get into talking about the spoilers.
I suppose we do. Listeners, This is where we'll leave you because, so first of all, I would recommend this game to almost literally anybody. This is a game that should be playable by pretty much anybody. It's on everything, or at least it's on PCs and the Nintendo Switch. And for most households, that means that you can play it. This is a game that I think everybody should check out. If you're staring at your Netflix queue and you're thinking, what do I watch next? And you can't find anything that like sparks that for you, like play this instead and you'll have an incredible time. For me, this felt a bit like playing through like 2 seasons of one of the best TV shows I've ever seen. I absolutely loved it. I love the characters. I love the acting. I love the performance. I love the writing. And it's like an amazing show of doing a lot with a little, in the same way that like incredible theater companies sometimes will just make an incredible story and experience out of a handful of boxes in a darkened room with a couple of lights. And this is like, this team took a handful of assets and, you know, just the tools of game creation and told an absolutely crackerjack killer story that like you could. Don't laugh at me for using the word crackerjack.
It's an incredibly original piece of science fiction.
Listen up.
You are
no malarkey here. This is a crackerjack story.
Yep. Shut up. It is. It's a great piece of science fiction. This is a great science fiction story. It's got stuff in it that you've seen before, but it's got other stuff in it that you definitely have not.
I finished this morning before this recording, and all I want to do is talk about this game forever. And I feel like I'm going to be struggling like I am today to talk about this game for the rest of my life. This is one of my favorite games now, especially in this genre. But I think just big picture, I just loved this so much that I don't know exactly. It's still very raw since I just finished it. So I don't necessarily have like a favorite games list. But if I were making one, I truly think this is up there. This is way up there for me.
Yeah, recency bias is a thing, but like, man, it's good. Yeah, if you want to play this, I already mentioned where you can find it. I think you should. We're going to be going to a spoiler break, and so I'll do the quick admin outro stuff here. You can find our show on the internet at shortgame.fm. That's where all of the links and buttons are. We would really like to have you join us on our Discord community for patrons. You can go to patreon.com/theshortgame and subscribe there, or you can find us on shortgame.fm, and all of our patrons get instant access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the games that we're playing, talk about the show. If you want to talk about I just did it again. I'm going to continue to do it. 1000xRESIST. We would love to talk about it more because I can't stop talking about it. And, you know, super glad that we managed to get to this before Game of the Year season. This was one of those games on my list that I was like, I have to play this before Game of the Year. So it's definitely on my list there, but you know, we'll be coming back to talk more about 2024's Game of the Year later this year. Let's see. I've been Reagan Kelly,
Nate Heininger,
and Shane Kelly.
And here it is, your spoiler break. What do we want to talk about? There's so much story. It's not like we can go beat by beat or anything. But I guess one thing that might be kind of interesting for us to chat about would be like, what questions do we have left over or remaining from the story? Like, is there anything where you're like, that still doesn't add up, or still doesn't make sense, or I want to know more about this? I can tell you what's remaining for me. I feel like we only got little hints of it. So I was really wondering early in the story, it seems like one of the earliest questions about the story is like, what happens to the sisters that go to the other side to be with the ALLMOTHER? What happens to Fixer? What happened to Fixer? The sisters that don't die, they eventually get called up, graduate to go to be with the ALLMOTHER on the other side, which I guess we just learn is literally the other side of the ship. What's going on over there? And I don't think it ever shows or tells us. ALLMOTHER is alone over there. She doesn't really have
we do get, and maybe I misunderstood it, but at one point I thought we got information that she basically collects little sets of the 5 on the other side. So there's she has groupings of the 5 sisters. There's a fixer, a healer, a knower, a watcher, etc.
That's definitely not something that it spends a lot of time on. The one thing that I still have questions about is it seemed as though the sisters were highly flammable, And I didn't really get an explanation for that. There's a lot of immolation in this, and at certain points you just I maybe it was one of the things about this story is you can be in the dark as to what you're experiencing is real or not. But there was a sequence where she just went around lighting people on fire with a word, and there was a lot about burning, and I don't know if I totally get it.
Well, so much we learn later that these are like memories of a memory, right? And so when that really,
at least it is up until, I don't know.
There's a big time skip, where you realize that we've been following the character of the Watcher from the beginning, and we get up to the point where we are reenacting this thing that we saw in the very initial opening sequence, which now we're finally seeing the climax of the story, presumably, which is Watcher shivving her mom. And
I was so shocked when I realized that was happening. I was like, this game has 10 chapters.
Yeah.
What the hell?
I didn't know that it had 10 chapters. So I got to that point, and then, what happens immediately afterwards is there's a big revelation, which is basically that the ancient sister who has been talked up this whole time is actually Principal. And then you start using the little zippy balls to jet out the roof, which you've only done in a memory, right? So to me, that sequence really reminded me of the end of The Matrix, where it's like, oh, maybe he can do stuff in the real world, or I can't remember. Maybe that was The Matrix 2. I don't know. And then it gives you not credits, but it gives you the like publisher logo, and I am easy to fool with stuff like this. I got hit with this publisher logo, and then it dumps you back at the like menu screen. And I was like, wow, great game. Can't wait to talk about the guys on the Discord.
I did find that, like, I don't totally, I guess they just want you to really feel like it's a reset of what you're doing. And so they kick you back to the title screen. But I did find it a little strange that they, like, I feel like that mechanic of being, like, booted to your...
The false ending.
So
kind of played out.
Don't make the mistake that I hope people don't make the mistake I made there, which is like, I was like, wow, what an interesting story. And I went to chapter select, and I was like, I guess I want to go back and check out some of the stuff that I had seen so far. Maybe if I watch the beginning again, and it's got that great bookend. Was there anything different in the original that? So I went and I started jumping through the chapter select, and I ended up having to replay the entire chapter 5 or whatever it was again. In order to get on to chapter 6, because it bumped me to that menu, and I was like, oh, okay, we are done.
You're supposed to, I suppose, choose continue
start
from that main menu.
Yeah,
and then if you've chapter selected at that point,
it has start in big red letters, like it doesn't normally, and I just am too dense. So
once you like, I did like that realization, because I had the same question, like, so what actually happened? Watcher just flew out of the... This was one of the parts where I got stuck too, because I was trying to find a gap in between all those guys, all the sisters blocking you after you've murdered Almo, and I'm like, where the hell do I go? And I'd done a full loop around this thing before finally realizing I just need to press left trigger and zip out of there. But I'm like, what? Watcher just killed Almo and then flew out of there, like flew out of the center, and then you realize that these are communions in a communion, essentially, right? Like you are now remembering Blue,
Watcher's
who's
memories,
being told, you're playing as Blue, who is being given Watcher's memory. So you're watching Watcher watch Almo's memories, and it's it's turtles all the way down. But it made it make a lot more sense that, like, a lot of this sort of surreal stuff that's happening in between all of this is because it's not even the communion. It's a communion within a communion. And
I really liked that turn, because it did leave me like really adrift at first. Like, you begin chapter 5 and you're like, who am I? Yeah. I look just like the original. Am I like Watcher escaped and like she's like become a new person? You know, she's incognito, and it's like that. But then she doesn't seem to remember anything about the previous action, and so it was like, what is going on here? And it took quite a while to sort of like understand what the relationship was between Watcher and Blue, this shell or missile.
Well, they play with the fact that you don't really know who you are, because there's a moment
with no name
when you're being I think it's when you're being like tortured or you're being held in captivity as Blue, and they say, hey, just do this thing and we will reset you, put you down, or it's your Watcher, and they're torturing you, and they say, just do this thing and we will reset you, we'll give you a whole new purpose, and we'll drop you into Old Town. And so I'm like, oh, okay, so that's who Blue must be, a Watcher but reset. And then you reject all that, and then you learn that you are two distinct people. But yeah, for a little while I thought Blue was Watcher after all of the events.
Yeah, that was pretty confusing. But I think by about chapter 6 or 7, I forget. Like, I was like, oh, okay, I'm starting to get it now. I liked the ending quite a bit. I really liked that we did eventually learn more about the occupants. Not enough to like fully remove their mystery, but like we learn a lot about like, well, like, there's been some scenes where it's like, well, why is it so red outside when you see the scenes in Vancouver? Why, when they're walking around, why is it so red? It's like, oh, the Earth is surrounded in a weird red cage. Like, that's just a thing. Like, I just thought it was like a stylistic thing. The game does amazing stuff with color, but like sometimes it's like for these very deliberate reasons like that. Like learning about like, I don't know. I just thought it just really carried through its science fiction premise in such a way that like I really liked the Nier games, but like they were really willing to let you hang without answers to your questions to a degree that this game wasn't quite doing. Like this game was like letting you live with these like big questions, but it did eventually have answers for you on most.
I was really happy at the distance the ending brought you. Like you go all the way to essentially like the ending of this whole thing, and you get explanations along the way. You have some choices that you get to make along the way. I was fully expecting this game to end on some well-written little line about the future and it just being that. But no, you get like a epilogue of like, here's what happened to all your favorite characters, and here's like now we're in the future, and there's obviously
one of my favorite things about that part of the game was like I think it happens as Secretary is sort of like rewriting things, but before you make your final choices, there's these series of impossible conversations, like conversations between Iris as the All-Mother, 1,000 years old, with her mother. In these like impossible conversations between characters that haven't interacted before, can't have interacted, and they were so beautiful. And I just especially like was struck by that moment with Iris and her mother, and in the hallway, talk about how did you do it as a mom, and she's been a mother to generations of clones of herself, the like stuff like that. Like it was willing to like take the time to have these, I'd almost go so far as to call them like fan service conversations, like moments where it's like willing to like let the characters be themselves for a moment and have the conversations that you would really like to have seen, even if they don't make sense. And I just, it's super.
There's a lot of characters that are part of the story of Iris's young life that remain important to the story through 1,000 years of post-apocalyptic history. We haven't really talked about that much. Either her parents or Jiao, who's maybe the most important character in the story. There are a lot of themes in this that feel very personal to the authorship of the game. And so when we talked about the COVID-19 pandemic, and we talked about the kind of political situation in Hong Kong is a huge aspect of this. And then just also a lot of aspects of Iris's personality are really explored and exploded into like cultural wide issues, and Zhao is a big part of that. Zhao is there's sort of a theme of generation immigrant problems, because her parents have pretty successfully, got themselves to Vancouver out of Hong Kong in their young life, although they constantly seems like talk about or think about returning, never do. Her parents have kind of set her up with a friend that is Zhao, who was born in Hong Kong, but is also a child of immigrants, and herself, I guess, an immigrant. And this is really the first view we get of Iris. And Iris is is very much a mean girl in this. She has a kind of cruel relationship with Zhao, where she doesn't really fully want to let Zhao be her friend in the way that Zhao wants, and the way that she's, I guess, pushed into by her parents. So the relationship between her and Zhao, and her father and mother are really deeply and very well explored here. I agree with you, Reagan. I thought that the conversation with the mom at the end was fantastic. We mentioned like the whole society is made up of clones of Iris. It was a huge surprise to me through later in the story. One of the later things that was revealed is that there's actually clones of Zhao as well, because they happen to have her DNA on some of Iris's stuff and cloned her to distant. They like the all the flaws of Iris are kind of magnified in the society that follows her, right? And
can I talk about what I think is maybe one of the my favorite things about Zhao in the story is the parallels between the occupant's story and Zhao's story. Zhao and the occupants, there's so much mirroring going on there, because the occupants are new to a new place, a new culture that they don't understand. And their first thing that they do is they want to look like Iris. They learn to talk like Iris. And it's it's everywhere in the story. I'm not going to do the best job of explaining it, but there's so much parallelism between and just Iris rejecting them and later accepting them, and there's so much parallelism between Iris's relationship with Zhao and the occupant story, and it's just so cool. And every time I noticed it, I was like, holy shit, that's so cool.
How about the first Zhao clone though, and their
real body horror there?
Yeah, it's really horrifying, really, really effective.
The voice actress who does Zhao is so great. She's the funniest thing in the whole game, and she was just astonishingly great.
Her performance in the late game, when the Zhaos are a revolutionary force.
Candy and Toffee Zhao they're so funny. Good. Their irony and their humor, unbelievable.
Yeah. And just the Zhaos as a revolutionary force, I loved them. It's so good.
There's so much more to talk about. We're already a little over an hour, and I think we have to probably stop somewhere. But God, I loved this game. It's such a great story. It's so well done. I cannot wait to see what this team does next. I mean, maybe they will just go back to making theater, and I suppose that would be perfectly fine. But God, I hope they make another one of not one of these exactly. You know what I mean?
We got it.
Incredible.
Somebody send this team another pandemic.
One last thing. How about when it switched to the full FMV, you're just seeing video of real world footage?
Man.
That is something that this is not the first time I've seen something like that. And I would almost expect it to be kind of cheesy, but I don't know. I was so locked into this game and so locked into the heart of it that when you see that, it was mesmerizing just watching just a car driving.
It was so heartbreaking too, because it comes at that moment where it's the first communion. It's Iris. And we also see Iris is using, and I don't think we know this yet, but she's like using the occupant's technology to try to connect. She is so isolated because she's the only person left from the original world, and everyone around her is looking to her for meaning, and she doesn't have it. She's lost all the meaning in the world, and she's trying so hard to connect with them. And the way she does that is by just showing them small moments from her life, and you get this video montage. And it was heartbreaking because you also understand that like this is so meaningful to Iris, but like what does this video out the window of a car mean to a clone who's only ever seen the inside of a tube, basically? Like, what does this mean to any of them? It can't mean anything. Yeah. But you also see like that's the genesis of all of this. This is like this sad, lonely person at the end of the world who can only talk to versions of herself that will never understand her, no matter what she does.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking, but it was really, really cool.
What was, let me, if we're wrapping it up, what was your favorite part of the game? This game had a lot of chapters, a lot of locations. Just what was your favorite part of the game?
That's feels impossible to answer, but I will say my initial is having just finished this and I'm thinking back on it. Some of the scenes that like stood out to me the most is the sort of the scene and everything right before and everything right after when you as Blue kill the entire provincial government. And
oh my God, I couldn't believe they did
and
that.
You learn and like learning, doing that first of all, and just like it actually happening and going through with it, and you've committed mass murder was astonishing. But then the like follow through and reconnecting with the original sisters who you have been told have all been incinerated at some point in time, learning Bang Bang Fire is still alive, Healer is still alive, Fixer is still alive, although we've been getting some hints at that leading up to it. Watcher is still alive. Like all of this, it was just so astonishing and just felt like holy shit, like this is a whole new thing now, like a whole new game, whole new environment. Everything is picking up from here. I really, really loved that part.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a small thing, but like I think maybe my favorite would be this is after so we have that scene before Watcher kills the All-Mother where she's discovered that what she thought was her friend and helper secretary is actually, one of them actually is an occupant in a sense, and just beats the shit out of him and literally rips his little like weird carapace apart, apparently kills him, uses part of what's left of him to stab the All-Mother. And then not long into, after we've kind of gotten together with the other sisters, Secretary comes back. And I was heartbroken when Secretary was killed because Secretary has this voice that sounds like a little boy. Only one of the only male voices in the game and sounds like this child. And when Secretary comes back, he's back, he's wounded, he's missing the part that was torn off of him to stab the All-Mother, but also his voice has changed. I don't know how they did this. Did they literally just have a child and then wait for their voice to change? Like as the voice actor? I don't know. But suddenly he sounds like a young boy who's started going through puberty. And like, nothing in the game was like more like it's a time skip, right? But it's also like all the characters have moved on and changed, but none of them more than Secretary, who now knows what he is. And he's damaged by it, and he's changed, and you hear it in everything he says. And I was like, that was incredible.
I love that too. I did think it was funny. I was a little like confused at first. I get it, now, but it's like you have this scene where you beat to death Secretary, and you learn that they're an occupant, and that's like a big deal. And then not that long later, at least in playing the game, it's like, Secretary's back. Oh, hey, buddy. Oh, sorry about that. And then they just like, wouldn't they all still be like, get the fuck away from us. You're an occupant. But everyone's like, they're cool. Don't worry. They're with us.
Yeah. I would say my favorite part came early, and that was in the very first communion that you see where you're going to the high school. It's such a shock to get there after, being in this kind of bizarre post-apocalyptic space, to see something so familiar and have just a perfect level of like, they do a lot of that stuff where it's like, looking at a coffee cup and she's like, well, what is this? What was the use of this object? Stuff like that, that really realizing like how strange the normal world, the real world, the world before, I guess, looks to her, and raised some really bizarre questions, stuff that I guess you asked earlier, like what we still have no answers to. There was a pigeon that became massive, very funny, no explanation. You remember that part?
Mm-hmm. Well, and the pigeon girl is a through line too that I don't get it fully know.
I missed the giant pigeon, and I heard someone mention it later in like a podcast I was listening to about the game, and I was like, "What the fuck are you talking about?" And I went and looked it up in a YouTube video, and I was like, "What? How did I miss this pigeon?"
Kind of. What was the other narrative adventure game that we played recently that had giant animals in it for no explicable reason?
I don't know what you're talking about.
With the nun.
It's on the tip of my tongue.
Indica. Yeah, okay. I'm here for it. I like big weird animals. But yeah, I think the watcher said so that she's like encounters this like 6-foot pigeon, and she's like, I think this must be an adult pigeon. So a lot of like fun, bizarre stuff in that sequence. In particular, like the first time you're talking to Zhao is in that sequence, and you're talking to this picture of Zhao, which is, things are all kind of mixed up in Iris's mind, is I think what's being really implied here, because you're accessing Iris's memories. And
you're Blue accessing Watcher's memories of Iris's memories.
and the picture of Zhao is one of the things that she was able to bring with her, like in her journal or diary with her to the underground or underwater facility. There's just a lot of high weirdness there. I'm a big sucker for high weirdness, and so that was my favorite segment.
Yeah, it's such an incredible game. There's so many good moments. Again, we could be talking all night. Listeners, if you have anything you want to say about the game, we would love to hear it. We'd love to chat with you about it. Just hop on our Discord, and we have a 1000xRESIST channel in there. Spoiler tags are being employed, but honestly, if you're this deep in the podcast, like, what are you doing? And yeah, I see you guys on there. Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.